Every case involving a breach of your human rights requires legal procedures that are beyond the financial capacity of 80% of the citizens. I want to give you just a little example, or a small example of that. We had the shootings in Linden as a result of state action. The police shot the people. The commissioners of inquiry said that, and they awarded compensation. But let's go through what had to be established, what had to be gone through to establish that. When they got shot, if those victims went to an attorney, presumably they'd either have to pay up front or they'd enter into some sort of contingency arrangement. If you can't afford to pay a lawyer up front, you're carked up, your human rights gone. And insofar as contingency, I will indicate to you how the courts have frustrated that by an award of continuous awards of low damages. To prove that the state, who is being accused of taking away the most fundamental right in Linden, which is the right to life, that the state was liable, the people of Linden, through the Commission of Inquiry, it would have been worse if it was a trial, because a lot of the evidence that is let in under a Commission of Inquiry includes technically evidence that is not legally admissible in a full legal trial. Some of it may be breaches of hearsay rule, the other technical aspects. So the Commission of Inquiry, in essence, Commission of Inquiry, in essence, allows a little bit more latitude in how you establish your claim. What did they have, the people of Linden have to do? Remember when the shooting took place, the first thing the government did was deny it. And it wasn't until the people got on the street that you started to get a little bit of retreat from the government. So you got the Commission of Inquiry established for the purposes of investigating what went on. What happened? Normally, a Commission of Inquiry should gather all the information and have the power to commandeer information from anywhere it is, whether it's in the presence of the state or it's somewhere else. So that's what a Commission of Inquiry is set up to do, it's set up to investigate, as opposed to a court which just sits down and listens to somebody prosecute and somebody defend. So the purpose of the Commission of Inquiry was to investigate. If you go back to the Linden Commission of Inquiry, that is the last thing it did. It left it to the people of Linden to have to prove that they were shot by the police. Because the commission wasn't investigating, they didn't call the police commissioner and say, by the way, Mr. Police Commissioner, bring the reports from the station, bring this. All of that had to come out as a result of questioning by the lawyers for the deceased people. So it reversed the whole purpose of a Commission of Inquiry. But more importantly, forget that. To start with, to establish the death as a result of them being shot by the police, you had to bring a pathologist from Trinidad and Tobago to witness the postmortem. They didn't allow him to do it, to witness it. And it was only as a result of his coming were you able to learn that each of those victims was shot straight through the heart with 00 pellets. Because the state didn't give you any of that information before the pathologist had the press conference. So that means, point number one, you got to be able to, rich enough to find the pathologist. 2, pay for him to come to Guyana. And 3, pay for him to perform not 1, but 3 postmortems or be present at 3 postmortems. So that reduced the ability of the state to claim that they died from something else. Because in Guyana, if you leave it to the state, they will give you some ridiculous submission. All of us will read the newspaper and say, do they seriously expect us to believe this? And we will move on. So we established that. So 1, that's expense number 1. 2, the police never, prior to the ballistic expert coming, told you that it was shotgun pellets, which were 00, that caused the death of those 3 people. And of course, what the state then does, when the state is under attack, is it defends itself. They say, we don't have 00, we stopped using 00s. Not like they even say we stopped using 00, they say we don't have 00. And it was not until the ballistic expert had to be flown from London, expense number 2, brought here, paid, his services paid for, and he went to the police and asked them to show the records. Of course, they didn't realize by showing him the records that they showed him the fact there were some 00s that they still had, that you were able to find out that the police actually still had 00. So were it not for the capacity of the people of Linden to pay for those two experts, their ability to establish the fact that the most basic fundamental right to life would have been breached. Exactly the same thing happened in Colwyn Harding. If Colwyn Harding did not have this absolutely fantastic support group that it has, you would have been left with the medical report from the doctors who said that no way the injury could have been caused. Because the state's first position when it was under attack was it's a lie, it's impossible. And it wasn't until the independent medical doctor examined him, and examined him in a part of his anatomy that had never been previously examined by those two doctors. It actually it's a nightmare story that is going to result in some legal action against the hospital. Because when the independent doctor examined Colwyn, they found that fecal matter from a month before was left in him because they did not examine his rectum and his anus. Just think about that. They didn't, but they were quick to go on TV to say that the injury that they saw was not caused by the bathroom. So it wasn't until you had the independent medical evidence here in Guyana, which cost money, because what you had to do, you had to pay for a private hospital, or get it donated, you had medical services you had to pay for, and you had to find a doctor who was willing and brave enough to be able to perform it. Now, and this is the reality of Colwyn Harding's story, were it not for him going into hospital, we would not have known anything about that, which means how many other people are sitting in the Georgetown jail in a similar condition purely because, not the fact that they weren't abused, but the fact that the injuries did not excite the public attention to the extent that we had an investigation. So just think of the youth that are in there. And it wasn't Colwyn alone. You had female and the male. My good friend Charlie just showed me that I only got 4 minutes left. Just want to deal with this in terms of the brutal reality. About 2011, actually, it was 2011, just before the previous president demitted office, Mr. Farrakhan's minister traveled to Guyana, Mr. Brother Muhammad, traveled to Guyana to do what? To speak to the young people about the importance of education and improving themselves. He went to Linden, he went to Buxton, he was in Channel 9, and he spoke to some youth in one of the urban areas. Only because he was attempting to educate those persons, he was arrested at 2 a.m. in the morning, went to Princess, dragged him out of Princess, and he went through the indignity of having been taken to CID. His hosts didn't know where he was. They found out that he was at the CID around lunchtime. I was there. A Guyanese person who arranged his visit went to visit him and got arrested and locked up because he went to ask about him. That's the only reason he got locked up. This is a Guyanese citizen who lived in Canada and has been living in Canada for the last 16 years. His barber, on his visits to Guyana, then went to find out what happened to him, and the barber himself got locked up. And they were moved from CID headquarters to the lockups in Brickdam here, which that's before the rehabilitation. They were the most awful, even Rohi admitted that the conditions in the lockups were subhuman. So they changed them. But these persons were put there. And Farrakhan's minister is a man of some age. He was 65 and of some repute. Never got locked up in the States in the worst of times. So the three of them are then put in prison in Brickdam, and they stay there for 36 hours. And it was only on the result of the intervention of Mr. Farrakhan, who called the president directly, that they released without explanation at 4 o'clock. I was retained to bring actions for breach of the constitutional right to freedom. We did. The gentleman from Canada, the Guyanese who's been living in Canada, who used to travel to the US without any problems, his case came up first, and it was heard by the Chief Justice. And the Chief Justice awarded him the amazingly large sum of 250,000 Guyana dollars for being locked up for 36 hours in those subhuman conditions. The reason I raise that is for this reason. If you go to a lawyer, if you were paying him by the case or by the hour, the legal bill would have been heading to $1 million, and you would have got $250,000. If you run on contingency, even if, and it's 50% is high, even if it was 50%, it would have been $175,000. No, actually $125,000 that you would have gotten in damages. So the logical question you will ask yourself is, why bother to bring legal proceedings if all the court is going to give me is this paltry sum? Contrast that, however, with a young lawyer who in 2006 was arrested for a traffic offense, put on the bench, not in the lockup, put on the bench for 4 hours in the traffic department. That's what we call the high-class area in the police station if you ever go in there. Because trafficking got the brutality like the inquiry's office. It doesn't smell the same here. It is not as subhuman because, of course, rich people is going there, so it can't be too bad. He was on the bench for 4 hours. The state, in an attempt to settle that case, offered him $500,000, and he rejected it. And the court offered him $2 million for 4 hours lockup. The reason I raise that is because a person in total of different ethnicity, different social background, gets a totally different reward. But we said, thank you very much. If that is the current rate, in Colwyn's case, it means that you get $12 million per day just for getting locked up if you're on the bench. Colwyn was locked up for 4 days. So that's $48 million. And that's before you get on to pain and suffering and other injuries. Because not only was he incarcerated, he was brutalized in the most vicious form. And therefore, when you put that into account, that's how you end up with $100 million. But the state's reaction to that is, oh, you're trying to take money free off the state. When all we are saying to the state is, you state said that you're prepared to pay some rich person who's a lawyer $12 million a day for getting locked up. And we're saying, well, if we all equal, then each and every one of us is entitled to $12 million per day. And if you decide that you're going to brutalize us and put foreign objects up on us, we're entitled to double that. And it is important. And I know my time is up and we're saying 0. This is the point I want to make, and I apologize that I can't stay right through to the end, to the suggestion station. This is the point that I ultimately want to offer for your consideration. It is important, as a matter of fact, vital, that we set up an institution or adopt one of the existing ones for the purpose of prosecuting these human rights cases, because individually, we will never, ever, especially the victims, be able to afford either the legal services, the expert services, or the professional services. And invariably, the human rights of the citizens are not the rights of the rich citizens that can afford it, which are breached. It's the rights of those who are least capable. So we need to work on that, and we need to ensure that all of us that are in this profession, my profession, I am embarrassed by the fact that they don't have more people, but the legal, the medical, and other professions are prepared to give up their time. And as the convention says, the state has to pay for that. So apart from funding it, the state must pay for it, because the convention says they must pay for the provision of legal services, they must pay for the provision of psychological services, and they must pay for the provision of